This lecture continues America before 1330, turning to South and then North America, with widely disparate geographical regions, temperature, and climate. This leads to different types of human organizations and civilizations. The timeline for what we will discuss today overlaps with the Olmec and the Maya civilizations we talked about last time, with those of the Nazca, the Moche, the Pueblo, and the Florida Glades cultures we'll talk about. South America, we will start with, is like Mesoamerica in that the Andean civilizations have complex hierarchical societies that are ruled by an elite class normally responsible for satiating the gods and acting as priests. The narrow coastal plain, which is going to be bordered by the Pacific Ocean on the west and the soaring Andes Mountains on the east, ensure that we have a very narrow and interesting geographical shape for Peru and the later Inca, which is going to be the narrow slit of land on the left-hand side of the continent. This contains one of the driest deserts in the world, Atacama, and this is where we also find a vast range of extremes, from these very dry deserts to the wet Amazonian basin to soaring mountains. This is also home to the Andean camelids, that being alpacas and llamas, that are used as beasts of burden for the civilizations who thrived here, that would also use them for their wool and meat. The eastern slopes of the Andes, as mentioned, are going to be the opposite of the very dry deserts in which we have these tropical rainforests of the Amazon basin. Hence, we have a range of animals we will see in their art, from the tropical Amazonian beasts down to those of the desert. Now, unlike other civilizations, the first ones to develop here around Peru are going to produce monumental architecture and textiles before they develop agriculture and ceramics. This is unheard of in human civilization and development, and due largely to the unique geography and temperate climate. The U-shaped ceremonial complexes are also going to be common, sunken with circular courtyards in the design seen here. Chavon de Huantar, or the Chavon culture, is going to be on the trade route between the coast and the Amazon basin. This highland site was a religious center and was occupied continuously between 900 and 200 BCE. The Andean periods can be broken down as follows and roughly correspond with those we talked about last time in Mesoamerica, from around 1800 BCE until the conquest by the Spanish in 1534 Common Era. They are divided by the notion of a rising and setting sun on the horizon from early until late. This civilization, the ones starting off here at Chavon, are innovative in their use of ceramics, metallurgy, and textiles. The Chavon culture will synthesize the coastal and highland traditions, bringing together both a U-shaped pyramid from the coastal tradition and a sunken circular plaza with carved reliefs from the highland tradition. Here we have a reconstruction of the city here and ceremonial spots that would be visited repeatedly over centuries with people surrounding this Andean civilization. Today, the maze-like system of galleries run beneath this structure with Amazonian beasts, revealing a tradition that can be found around the globe of Neolithic peoples, where we find an anthropomorphic joining together in a chimerical fashion of man and beast for supernatural purposes. Here we have an example of the underground maze-like structure that we have, which, similar to the Minoan civilization and the palace at Knossos, could be considered maze-like and labyrinthian. In the center, we have Lanzon of the Chavon culture here around 900 BCE, which is carved of granite 15 feet tall. It is a blade-shaped stone that is a projection at the top, much like an Andean planting stick. Seen here, you can see the tapering in the upper section as you have this resonating chamber below, which is going to filter down the priest's voices from above. The stick, as seen here, would have had a perpendicular protrusion, allowing for one's foot to press the stick into the soft soil to then add seeds. Thus, we have this notion of planting, agriculture, and regeneration brought together with these Amazonian beasts. The humanoid body, seen here, with clawed hands and feet and enormous fangs, show eyebrows and hair that end in snakes. Thus, we are communicating this transformational imagery, which is quite common for this civilization and others in the Andean area. The notion of bringing together a man's body and the head or other attributes of animals is going to be found throughout the world in the Neolithic period, starting around 30,000 BCE. The energies that are shown here, controlled by anthropomorphic beasts and or humans wearing animal masks, are often associated with shaman or ritualistic activities. So the style seen here, which will be carried on, which would be familiar in Mesoamerica, is compact and frontal, that shows flat reliefs with curvilinear designs, combining humans and animals. Now, this was a pilgrimage site, which allowed it to spread this style throughout the South American coastline, whereby an oracle would be consulted. People would travel for hundreds of miles around in order to ask this oracle a question, whereby this chamber is directly above a statue, which allowed the priest voices into the chamber so you could hear what is being said and interpreted by the oracle. This is very similar to ancient Greece, where we have the Pythia, who is a medium or shaman, who inhaled these vapors from a chasm below or chewed hallucinogenic laurel leaves. They would sit on a bronze tripod while a male priest asked questions. After a sacrifice was made by the inquirer, they would then interpret the ramblings, sometimes as they were understood, of this oracle. Turning to the Nazca culture that existed between 1 and 700 Common Era, we have one that is known for their woven fabrics and multicolored pottery along with geoglyphs. Famously, earth drawings or geoglyphs, as the one seen here of a hummingbird from around 1 to 700 Common Era, are massive, massive designs that are going to be found on the ground, produced through the removal of dark oxidized stones to expose lighter underlying stones. The designs will range from a variety of animals, from a killer whale, a monkey, a spider, and a duck, and they are up to 12 miles long, often being used for ceremonial pathways as they would walk around the areas that are outlined. This is not unusual, and the fact that they can be seen from the sky has, of course, led to many myths and many conspiracy theories, but this is a practice that can be found throughout the ancient world. At Stonehenge, for instance, the pathway to the burial of the dead at Stonehenge also acted in much the same way, as we transition in a ritualistic fashion from the living area to that of the deceased. Thus, the act of walking these path lines and pathways allowed one to connect and transition and prepare oneself psychologically to enter the realm of the dead. The next culture we'll discuss is that of the Mochi, who existed at the same time, though about a century later, 100 to 700 Common Era. They are going to be ruled by a series of lords from a ceremonial and administrative center that we will discuss now. The center and the largest of the structures made is known as the Huaca del Sol and the Huaca de la Luna, or the Pyramid of the Sun and the Moon. These massive structures are created with adobe brick and sun-baked blocks of clay mixed with straw. Standard design of a rectangle, they would pack this mud along with straw to hold it together and leave it in the sun to dry out or bake. And then these modular units would then be used to create these massive structures. The notion of a pyramid of the sun, and dedicated to the moon as well, is nothing new. If we look at the ceremonial center at Teotihuacan, this is already well established, and certainly the sun and the moon as these entities to be worshipped and deified were common throughout Mesoamerica and South America. The designs here are massive and are on the same scale as Teotihuacan at 1,100 feet long, 500 feet wide, and 59 feet tall. Now their glory is somewhat diminished, as shown by this design of the area that is washed out, because the Spanish diverted a river nearby to mine the gold in the burials in this pyramid of the sun, much like we see at the White Temple in Ziggurat at Uruk, one of the earliest Sumerian ziggurats and temples, the mud brick washed away with the floods. Originally, we would have had very brightly painted reliefs with deities on the upper level, warriors in the central level, and then captives or slaves at the lowest level. This brightly painted, polychromed, stuccoed relief would have dedicated the temple to these deities associated with the sun god. Coincidentally, along with their mastery of this adobe brick, the Moche were also excellent potters, and these designs are going to attest their mastery of the medium. Now, they produce primarily humans, animals, and little villages and designs and architecture around a foot tall for each one of these pots. Now, because we have different humans and animals does not mean that's the most common type of subject they have in pottery. In fact, they're most well known for their erotic pottery, which shows in various positions men and women engaged in erotic activities. And they would mass produce these from ceramic molds, sending them throughout South America and Mesoamerica. We have many of them surviving today, attesting to the abundance in which they were produced. However, Moche iconography, aside from pottery, relates to a central theme of blood sacrifice, a sacrifice of captured prisoners by three different types of people: a warrior priest, a bird priest, and a priestess. We find that Moche lords and ladies would assume the roles of these figures and carry out this blood sacrifice. The blood ritual itself is going to be carried out using a crescent-shaped knife, which would be used to slice the throat of these ritualistic victims. And we see in the art of the Moche that the figures would, performing the ceremony, drink the blood of their victims. In a tomb at Chavon, we have a buried warrior priest here with regalia, accompanied by gold and turquoise ear spools. This is very revealing of the central motifs in this blood ritual and blood sacrifice. Now, throughout Mesoamerica and South America, we know that high-ranking members of each society, especially men, would wear these ear spools and earrings. This can be seen in the Inca as well as other colossal heads we discussed at San Lorenzo. Here, with the ear spool from Chavon from Peru, with the Moche culture from 300 Common Era, we have three Moche warriors also wearing ear spools, having headdresses that resemble sacrificial knives that would have been used in this blood ritual. One also can see it in the central figure of this priest in the center and his nose piercing as well. The crescent-shaped nose ornament and the removable gold club and shield were also found in the burial, but also show us what they would have worn. The necklace of owl's head beads is also specific to the culture. Here we find that the repeated motifs and the design would not only show us what they would wear, but how they would carry out these rituals and what they would have been like in reality. North America is quite different than South America in that it is very sparsely populated. The early peoples here are primarily hunter-gatherers, and many remain as such until the arrival of the Europeans in the 15th century. The eastern North American area is going to be the home to burial and ceremonial earthworks of the Woodland period, which lasts roughly between 300 BCE and 1000 Common Era. The earthwork projects in river valleys of Ohio and Mississippi are going to be the dominant forms and the dominant production of these peoples that is left behind. The beaver effigy platform pipe here of Bedford Mound in Pike County is of the Hopewell people, which existed between 100 BCE and 550 Common Era. The pipes here are going to be used for ritual tobacco smoking, and they were traded widely, for we find them from Lake Superior to the Gulf of Mexico. They would have had river pearls inset in the eyes and bones for the teeth here of this beaver. These are going to be found in the freshwater streams of the civilization and also the transportation system, such as the Illinois River. Note in each one of these examples of animals that would have had pearls for eyes that they face the individual who is smoking. Thus we find that the spirit world is going to be suggested and or transitioned to or experienced through the process of these rituals and smoking. The most common have come down in popular culture of the idea of a peace pipe, for instance, in several Native American tribes. With the emergence of the Mississippian period of 700 to 1550 Common Era, we have widespread complex chiefdoms that are going to arise, and mound building becomes much more common and widespread. From 1539 to 43, Hernando de Soto is going to encounter these peoples, and through his engagement and interaction with them, spreads smallpox, which kills 80% of the population, which was even worse than the Black Death in Europe, which killed 60% of the population in 1348. Because these native peoples had no immunities to the diseases that the Europeans were carrying, they were decimated, and thus we find that their areas more easily colonized. Now, the Great Serpent Mound in Adams County, Ohio, is an example of the Mississippian culture, produced around 1070 Common Era. It is one of the largest mounds in the region, in the form of a twisting snake. The snake seen here, which is going to be approximately 1,254 feet long, is going to be shown as though it is eating an egg. The Y shape at the end here to the left and the oval enclosure shows the serpent swallowing this egg, a common sight in the area, and could have been the result of and response to Halley's Comet, which went overhead in 1066. And we find many civilizations are going to see this as an omen, especially in Western Europe as well, say with the Battle of Hastings. The Mississippian urban center here at Cahokia in East St. Louis, which thrived between 1000 and 1300 Common Era, had 15,000 people in the center with 10,000 in the surrounding area. The central area of Cahokia here is going to be organized around an elevated platform with a wooden structure with thatched roofs on the top. That is right in the middle, elevating it above the surrounding area. That, along with the circular wood hinge, will be the primary focal points upon visiting this area today. The largest feature is the Earth Mound or Monk's Mound, which is 15 acres, originally rising 100 feet in the air, which had at its summit a wooden fence with a rectangular building. You can see how the wealthy elite would be on these raised platforms with these fences around their dwellings, protecting them from the outside world. Here is what is left of these massive mounds that are going to be elevated, showing how they would dominate the landscape when originally this civilization was thriving. The wood hinge, or circle of wooden columns of 48 posts in a 420-foot diameter circle, was used just as Stonehenge to determine solstices and equinoxes, that being when we're going to have summer and winter solstice and spring and fall equinox. So it acted as a type of calendar, or astronomical calendar, if you will, just as Stonehenge with the heel stone, thus, of course, pointing out the summer solstice. The human settlement at Stonehenge, much the same way, was wooden instead of stone, and is in the same shape. Thus, the realm of the living and the realm of the dead reflect one another in each one of these cultures. Another culture in North America that thrived for much longer than others is the Florida Glades culture, located in modern-day Florida, and it existed between 500 BCE and 1513 Common Era. Here we know from 1895 excavations off Key Marco, we found posts here carved with animals preserved in a swamp. This culture thrived because of the abundance of food and of flora and fauna that would, of course, provide ample opportunity for transportation and would have made surviving in a hunter-gatherer sense much more tenable than in the more hostile regions, say, in the American Southwest. Here we have a pelican figurehead. Originally, this would have been painted, and along with others, represents the type of animal and bird heads and human masks that are found here in this culture. So the idea of a human wearing an animal mask or a bird mask goes back to the Lascaux cave from 15,000 BCE in the well painting. So this notion that shamans would have also worn animal head masks as part of their rituals is nothing new. This is shared by cultures around the globe. This kneeling cat-human shrine is also going to be quite common and relates to a long tradition that humans have showing an anthropomorphized animal or a human body with an animal's head. So again, this could, like the human with feline head from Hohenstein-Stadel in Germany, show a shaman, where these rituals involving animal skins are very common across the globe. So we could have here a shaman wearing a ritual lion mask or a ritual feline or bird mask, as in the previous example. The latest interpretation, as we discussed in survey, would be that prehistoric humans did not differentiate between humans and animals, but were seen as part of one common group. The shaman himself is going to be a figure that is in existence in many different regions and environments and backgrounds throughout the globe. The heads here are actually found also on ceremonial furniture. The bird and animal cult or clan symbols they believe they could possibly represent are like those in the Pacific Northwest, where different people believe they were descended from different types of animals. Thus, those are shown in their totem we'll talk about here shortly. In the American Southwest, we have a very different situation geographically and as far as the climate is concerned. So we find that agriculture is going to develop relatively slowly in these three early cultures. The region has received very low rainfall for thousands of years, and so it makes agriculture quite difficult. So hunter-gatherer civilizations are those that first emerge and survive the longest. The first of these cultures is the Hohokam, that existed between 200 BCE and 1300 Common Era, primarily located in southern Arizona. This culture developed irrigation systems and multi-story residences, along with ball courts, which demonstrates their connection with other Mesoamerican cultures to the south, such as that of Teotihuacan and the Maya. The following culture is the Mimbre or Mogollon culture that thrived 100 years later from 200 BCE and lasted until 1150 Common Era. This culture is going to have been located in New Mexico and East Arizona, where potters are going to leave their work in burials in the floor, and we have primarily from these excavations knowledge of this culture from said burials. Like the Neolithic cultures of Mesopotamia, we know that dozens of bodies were found under the floorboards here at this culture, where they would dig down and retrieve the earlier skulls. In this case, we find they would place bowls that are inverted over the heads of the deceased. Here is an example of one of these bowls with scorpions found in Swartz Ruin in southwest New Mexico. And as an example, the Membre culture was produced between 1000 and 1150 Common Era. It is an earthenware with white slip and black paint, illustrating the dome of the sky, where different creatures would help transport, like psychopompoi or angelic figures in the Western tradition, transport the dead to the spirit world. Here, abstract forms, which are going to be easily recognizable as from the American Southwest, dominate these insect-like creatures. The idea of moving through the dome of the heavens to reach a celestial sphere where a area where gods and other supernatural figures are going to reside is common in most cultures. Here we have said excavations with the bowls over their heads, thus of course performing the dual function of a funerary mask as those found in Mycenaean civilizations and those of the Egyptians in the West, and also covering the head and acting as this divinatory aid in transitioning peacefully to the next realm. The next culture are the ancestral Puebloans, or Anasazi. These peoples existed between 500 Common Era and 1250 Common Era in the Four Corners region where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico come together. They adopted the irrigation technology from the Hohokam civilization and their multi-storied apartment buildings, which they called great houses or pueblos. These pueblos are going to be easily defensible and provide shelter from the extreme temperatures in the desert. The knowledge of the civilization also comes from burials and pottery, such as that of the seed jar here, where with earthenware with black and white pigment at 14.5 inches in diameter, we have an example of what is produced by the women of this Anasazi civilization. The seed jar is going to be the product of women potters who would coil build earthenware and then heat them in low fire ceramic temperatures. The designs of abstract patterns here match the same designs we looked at a moment ago with the scorpion. So in order to design and build up a coil-built earthenware pot, we are going to take the coils or strings of clay and then wind them around in a circular fashion and then place them packed one on top of another and then smooth them out together. Since they do not have a potter's wheel, this is the process for producing these handmade objects. These pots would be suspended from roof poles to keep them out of reach of rodents and other harmful aspects of nature, such as insect activity. We know that the design of the houses was one much like a sunken earthen house would be suspended as though we enter and exit the structure by way of ladders and other suspension activities and designs. Now, Chaco Canyon in New Mexico is going to be the largest of and house the largest of these pueblos. It is 30 square miles where we have 9 great houses or pueblos the civilization is going to exist on. And here we have the largest of Pueblo Bonito, which was inhabited between 830 and 1250 Common Era. The design here of this pueblo or great house is going to be that of a D shape and contain many important structures and rooms. Though it is built in stages, we know that in the end it has 800 rooms, 5 stories tall, and this D shape of course does make it defensible, but also provides ritualistic and ceremonial functions. The additional structures, such as the kivas, of which there are 32, are used for rituals, these circular rooms or pits. Here we have an example of them that are going to be lowered into the ground, much like the earlier dwellings that are going to make it much more cool to live in these areas in the summer and in the blistering heat. So this is reminiscent of these earlier pit houses, as they are called. These pit houses are dug into the ground. We have beams on the roof which make up the roof that leave open one hole in the roof which allows entrance and egress by way of a ladder. The interlocking pine logs forming these dome-like roofs would have had this hole, and thus we enter and egress through the ceiling, thus making it naturally air-conditioned and defensible. This is the same as what we talked about in the survey class at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, whereby they also were going to design mud brick homes with these timber frames, and you would access it through the roof. The indentation of the floor directly below the ladder was known as the navel of the earth, and it was where the Puebloans believed their ancestors emerged originally from the earth. As with all creation myths, we find that this civilization believed that mankind and humans were developed out of earth or dirt, and that is how they are formed in nearly every creation story, either by a particular god or group of them. Now, the roof is going to also function as a floor of this communal plaza for these people. So during the day, they can, of course, go about their activities of hunter-gatherers and then converse and interact on the top of these houses. But in the evening, they would also provide a second story. The Pueblo Bonito was the hub of a great network that linked 70 other communities together. But this specific one, the Bonito, is a pilgrimage site for the whole region for generations. Unfortunately, a drought in the 12th century forced the apartment-like dwellings to be created on the ledges of these sheltering cliffs in Arizona. The photographs are going to record the civilization as they continued dwelling there into the 19th century. Now, being that it's difficult to commute to the farm, they had to sacrifice the location and the convenience with security, and that it would insulate them from the extreme temperatures of the desert. Now, while they were there, they created two types of art. One, and the first being rock art, where they would paint pictographs onto the surface of the walls in the canyon on which they were living. Most of them are human figures with long rectangular bodies and heads. The so-called anthropomorphs here in the Great Gallery in the Horseshoe Barrier Canyon in Utah show us the Holy Ghost, this 8-foot-tall central figure with large, wide eyes. The holy figures are often associated with snakes or dogs, and perhaps here with the rain gods, which are very important to a people that live in a very dry, arid climate. The Hunter's Mural in 9 Mile Canyon in Utah illustrates another type of art produced by these peoples, the petroglyph. So the petroglyph is going to be created when you have an area of rock pecked or engraved away, scraped through layers of darkened varnish created through millennia of rainwater. So they want to do this to reveal the lighter stone underneath. In the examples found here, we have a hunter with a bow off to the right, who's going to be eyeing a flock of bighorn sheep, whereas there is an armless figure with a horned headdress that intermingles with these animals, and once again could be one of these shaman who is wearing an animal headdress. The same can be seen when we enter the Neolithic period of Çatalhöyük, where we have hunters taunting, once again, a deer in this instance. So what are the interpretations? Well, the same as prehistoric man in the western part of Europe. We have the notion of painting and producing images of animals relating to either the survival of the herds, trying to control them or bring them under the control of man through some type of magical or spiritual process. But really, we don't know exactly what they were used for, because often what is shown are either not the primary food source of the civilization, or we do not have a written record of the people. The next class will continue the art of the Americas, looking after 1300 with the Aztec and the great Inca empires.